Get him out of here right now. Richard's voice rang out, filled with irritation. Two security guards from the Carter Prestige Auto Showroom immediately moved toward the middle-aged man, who remained calm, holding his phone. The atmosphere suddenly grew tense. All eyes turned toward the dramatic scene unfolding before them. But no one could have predicted that in just a moment, the entire situation would be turned on its head. What led to this moment? Let's follow this surprising and meaningful story. That morning, Raymond Carter walked into the Carter Prestige Auto Showroom, a new branch of the luxury car group he had recently acquired. A successful businessman, Raymond disliked showing off. He wanted to visit the showroom as an ordinary customer to see how the staff treated customers when they didn't know who he was. Without a flashy suit or extravagant accessories, Raymond wore a worn leather jacket, jeans, and sneakers. A simple watch rested on his wrist, but his confident stride spoke volumes. Today, he was not a millionaire businessman, he was just a customer looking to buy a car. As he stepped into the showroom, Raymond admired the display models, luxurious Bentleys and high-end Mercedes cars. The crystal chandelier above reflected off the glossy paint finishes, creating a dazzling and elegant atmosphere. Most of the staff were busy, barely noticing the plainly dressed man who had just entered, except for Richard. Richard, a senior salesperson, was chatting with a few colleagues. He prided himself on his ability to spot VIP clients. And today was no exception. He glanced at Raymond, assessing him in seconds. A black man, dressed simply, standing in front of a Rolls-Royce Phantom worth over $500? Richard couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. He walked over, eyes filled with suspicion. "Excuse me, sir, can I help you?" Richard's tone was polite, but his eyes were cold and judgmental. Raymond replied calmly, "I'd like to see a few models." Richard crossed his arms, scanning Raymond from head to toe before shaking his head slightly. "Are you sure? This is a luxury showroom. Our cars don't go for less than 6 figures." Raymond simply smiled faintly, waiting to see what Richard would do next. But Richard pressed on, this time with a slightly impatient tone. "Honestly, I think you'd be better off at the used car dealership across the street. I can help you with that." Some of the nearby employees exchanged glances. A few shook their heads, while others stood in awkward silence. No one spoke up. Raymond didn't show any sign of anger. He simply glanced around the showroom, then turned back to Richard, his calm demeanor making Richard increasingly uncomfortable. "Did you hear what I said?" Richard's tone sharpened, the corner of his mouth curling in disdain. "This showroom isn't for everyone." Before Raymond could respond, another customer walked into the showroom, a middle-aged man dressed in an elegant suit. Richard immediately turned away from Raymond and rushed toward the new customer. "Good morning, sir. I'm Richard, and it's a pleasure to serve you." Richard's tone was completely different, polished and eager. But before Richard could continue, the customer raised a hand to stop him. He looked past Richard and toward Raymond with a respectful expression. "Mr. Carter, I didn't expect to see you here," the customer said, shaking Raymond's hand with clear admiration. The entire showroom fell into a stunned silence. Richard froze, his face turning pale. Several employees' jaws dropped. Raymond's smile remained calm, but his gaze had shifted. There was now a cold sharpness beneath his eyes. He took out his phone and dialed a number. His voice was steady and authoritative. "Prepare the transfer documents for this showroom. I want it finalized today." Richard's eyes widened in shock. What did you say?" he stammered. The showroom doors swung open. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit rushed in. It was Mark, the CEO of Carter Prestige Auto. He quickly walked toward Raymond and bowed his head respectfully. "Sir, I wasn't aware you were coming. My sincere apologies for the delay." Richard stood paralyzed. Every employee in the showroom stood frozen, their eyes fixed on Richard, who was now trembling and visibly pale. Raymond's gaze slowly returned to Richard, his eyes piercing. He was waiting to see what Richard would do next. Richard stood frozen, his face pale. The entire showroom was engulfed in silence. No one dared to say a word. Just a minute ago, he had been full of arrogance, convinced that he could judge a customer by their appearance. But now, the man he had looked down on was none other than the new owner of the showroom. Raymond Carter stood still, his gaze calm but penetrating. He wasn't angry, nor did he look disappointed. He was simply studying Richard's expression as regret, panic, and fear gradually surfaced on his face. Mark, the CEO of Carter Prestige Auto, cleared his throat and turned toward Richard, his voice cold. "Richard, do you realize what you've just done?" Richard opened his mouth but couldn't form any coherent words. He stammered a few meaningless sounds, then lowered his head, his hands clenched into fists. He knew he had made a grave mistake. Raymond remained composed, but this time, he spoke. "I don't care who sells the most cars or who has the highest performance. What matters to me is how my employees treat customers." "Richard, do you truly believe you handled that correctly?" Richard swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I didn't realize it was you." Raymond gently shook his head. You didn't recognize anyone, and that is the real problem." His eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of each employee. His voice was calm, but there was undeniable weight behind every word. "What just happened is not the fault of one person. It reflects a flawed culture that I cannot accept. From day one, I wanted to see how this showroom truly operates, and I am not impressed by what I've seen." The tension in the room was palpable. Every employee held their breath, waiting for Raymond's next words. Raymond turned to Mark. "I want a meeting, right now, every employee." Mark nodded and immediately began gathering all the staff into the conference room. Richard hesitated for a moment before following, his face rigid with tension. The sleek glass conference room quickly filled up. A heavy silence hung in the air as everyone understood that a major change was about to unfold. Raymond stood at the center of the room, both hands resting on the table as his gaze scanned the faces of his employees. "I am Raymond Carter, and as of this moment, I am the owner of Carter Prestige Auto." Some employees gasped in shock, while others lowered their heads in shame as they recalled how they had either ignored or even laughed at Raymond earlier that morning. "I'm not here to fire anyone immediately," Raymond said, his voice steady and authoritative. "But I need you all to understand one thing. From now on, every customer who walks through this showroom's doors must be treated with respect, without exception." Raymond paused for a moment, letting his words settle into the tense atmosphere before continuing. "Remember, we're not just selling cars, we're selling an experience, trust, and the dreams of our customers. And if any of you believe you have the right to judge who deserves to be treated well based on appearances, then you shouldn't be working here." All eyes turned toward Richard, who stood with his head bowed, his face pale. Mark spoke up, his tone sharp. "Richard, as the head of the sales team, you were supposed to set the standard for customer service. But today, you failed." Richard's hands tightened into fists. His voice was barely a whisper. I understand. I'm sorry." Raymond's expression remained calm. He looked at Richard and asked, "Do you think an apology is enough?" Richard slowly shook his head. I know I need to change, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Raymond gave a slight nod, as if granting Richard a chance to redeem himself. "Good, then I'll give you one last chance. Starting today, you'll undergo retraining in customer service, and you will no longer be the head of the sales team. You will have to prove that you deserve this second chance, not with words, but with actions." The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Some employees looked at Richard with sympathy, others were visibly surprised. Richard nodded, his face full of remorse. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Raymond said nothing more, but in his eyes, there was a faint glimmer of satisfaction. He believed in second chances, but only for those who genuinely wanted to change. 1 year later, the transformation of the showroom. 1 year later, Carter Prestige Auto was no longer just an ordinary showroom. It had become a symbol of outstanding customer service. Every customer, regardless of how they dressed or what they drove, was welcomed with warmth and respect. And Richard? He had completely transformed. Gone was the arrogant salesman. Richard was now the first to greet customers with a genuine smile and a listening ear, focused on understanding their needs rather than judging them by appearances. That day, Raymond visited the showroom once again. This time, he wasn't there to test anyone. He was there to witness the transformation. As he walked through the gleaming showroom, Richard approached him with a confident but humble smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter, may I help you with anything today? Raymond smiled. Number. Richard, you already have. Quote.